Hello and welcome to the Swinging Christies, the Christie Time podcast about Agatha Christie in the swinging 60s. I'm Mark Aldridge and I've written a lot about Agatha Christie, including in my books about Poirot and Miss Marple.
And I'm Gray Robert Brown. I'm a writer and a Christie fan.
Oh, my goodness. What happened there?
Well,
it's like I could hear it again and again.
It was an echo, Mark.
Echo.
Because, of course, today's episode is called Echoes of the Disappearance. How are you?
I'm very good. Well, should I say where I am?
Yes. And
where we are.
I was going to say, it's not just you. I am sat next to you.
Yeah, we are on a balcony. In Tenerife.
In Tenerife, yeah.
Yes, at the marvellous Agatha Christie International Festival that's held here in Puerto de la Cruz.
Yes.
Why would it be held in Puerto de la Cruz, though, Gray? Of anywhere, which is the most frequent thing I've been asked when I say to people, I'm off to the Agatha Christie Festival in Tenerife.
Somebody
and they're
said
like,
to me, Yeah, someone said to me it felt like a random generator of connected items. It was like, we're going for a Agatha Christie Festival at Tenerife.
Yeah.
Like just a sort of...
yes.
But yes,
next year it's Muriel Spark in Brazil.
Yeah. Oh, well, sign me up. Yeah, she famously visited here, didn't she, in 1927, and wrote a couple of things set here. And on that note, this is not the only episode we will be recording here, but we will keep tight-lipped about what exactly we mean by that for the time being.
Unless you meet us in person, in which case we'll
give us a drink. We'll tell anyone. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's an incredible view. We've got palm trees and cacti in the vicinity.
Yeah.
I can see the sea. Can you see the sea, Mark?
I can see the sea. The sea can see me.
Well, very good. Does the sea know who you are?
Well, I mean, I've been coming here for sort of 6 years or something now. But yes, we should say that the festival, by the way, is every other year here in November in Puerto de la Cruz, so do keep an eye out for it.
Definitely.
It's like 2027, which I'm sure will be advertised closer to the time, I hope.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's such a brilliant crowd. Anna in particular, who does all the work for it, is phenomenal. And we can see the sort of black rock of the mountains, which
very volcanic.
Agatha talks about in The Man from the Sea, the black rocks.
Yes, because the sea in front of us is an unpredictable element, certainly. And so what Agatha remembers is digging her hands in deep into the sand, I think. And or there's not quite sand here, it's sort of very fine rock because it's really strong. But we haven't ventured too closely to it so far.
No, which is wise, because there is in fact a weather warning out today.
Yes, it is.
So we've taken the opportunity to hunker down and speak to you all.
So what are we looking to cover today then? You said echoes.
I did. I won't do it again. I won't do the echo again.
What's the echo again?
I'm not that much of a ham. No, we... so as we sort of alluded to, so Agatha came here in 27. So after her annus mirabilis of 1926, when she had a breakdown and her marriage broke down and her mother passed away. And we're going to be talking about all the ways in which that seismic event in Agatha's life created ripples, if you like, if you're tired of the echo metaphor already, that cast through the swinging texts, the books and the films and everything else that we look at between 59 and 71. So let's get on with it.
Let's.
So I think it's fair to say it wasn't an easy decision for us to cover the disappearance, because it's not... it's a sensitive topic all these years later, because essentially what we're talking about is a really dark moment in Christie's life. It also, happens 40 years before the point at which we're telling Christie's story. And as we'll discuss in a minute, the way that it's been spoken about hasn't always been particularly kind or particularly fair, I think. But I said to you, I remember, I'm a firm believer that in any creative endeavour, sometimes the thing that you say we're not going to do is the very thing that you should then try and do, actually, to kind of challenge yourself.
Because this was one of the early things that we discussed about why we wanted to do the Swinging Christies, was because we were so sick of people talking about the same few things, including the disappearance. But I think we've definitely organically found a way that we actually do want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it is something that we have detected in these texts.
A way that it can be relevant to our particular lens, absolutely. And also, it's almost like you've earned your stripes by that point, by going, we've dedicated enough time to the lesser known stuff. We've put those lesser loved books on the map in a way that, we intended to, and now maybe it's okay to talk about the slightly more commonplace stuff. But yeah, so let's tell the story of the disappearance for those who don't know, but we're quite keen to be led by Agatha's own words and own account as much as possible, because it's always said that she doesn't talk about it in her autobiography, but there is a fleeting extract, isn't there? Yes,
there is. And obviously, as we were always saying, the autobiography was finished in the mid-60s, in 65. And so this is again, relevant to our era, that it's clearly something that she had sort of thought about briefly because it's such an important part, but it clearly decided she didn't want to dwell on it. And she says, so this is as she wrote in the autobiography, many years later, someone going through a period of unhappiness said to me, I don't know what is the matter with me. I cry for nothing at all. The other day the laundry didn't come and I cried. And the next day the car wouldn't start. Something stirred in me then, and I said, I think you had better be very careful. It is probably the beginning of a nervous breakdown. You ought to go and see someone about it. I had no such knowledge in those days. I knew I was desperately tired and that the sorrow of losing my mother was still there deep down, though I tried, perhaps too much, to put it out of my mind. If only Archie would come, or Punky, or someone to be with me. Then Archie came. I think the nearest I can get to describing what I felt in that moment is to recall that old nightmare of mine, the horror of sitting at a tea table, looking across at my best loved friend, and suddenly realising that the person sitting there was a stranger. That, I think, describes best what Archie was like when he came. I had admired his ruthlessness before, now I saw the other side of it. So after illness came sorrow, despair and heartbreak. There is no need to dwell on it. I stood out for a year, hoping he would change, but he did not. So ended my first married life. And then that's it. She moves on. That tale about being emotional just because the car won't start, she actually recounts that same thing to a letter to Christiana Brand a few years later, which makes me wonder whether that's actually Agatha. No, it's not somebody talking to Agatha. That might have been her own recollection.
As in a few years after the autobiography?
She writes to Christiana Brand and says, I know it's like when suddenly you cry and the car won't start, or just because the car won't start or whatever. Yeah. And so perhaps there's at least a conflation there of what actually had happened.
Yeah, interesting. I think, it's quite a raw extract, and I think there's more in there than people maybe think, because she doesn't go blow by blow what happens on the night in question, which is what tabloid journalists have been clamouring for over the years. Doesn't mean that it's not revealing in its own kind of quiet, heartbreaking way.
Yeah, and there's a few things in the 1970s when Agatha starts to be in less good health, and when it's clear that she's not going to be able to write much more, if anything, then actually talk does turn to what's going to happen with the autobiography within Collins, the publisher. And it's very early on, there's a very brief conversation, but where somebody says, very few people have read it, and it still needed to be edited and everything. But at that point, it was understood that she didn't really talk about the disappearance. So the publisher knew even before they had read it that they understood. I think it means that probably that had been communicated perhaps as part of the deal or the understanding, so that there were no raised expectations.
Yes, this isn't a big tell-all. Exactly. I'm not giving you the salacious. Yeah, I can imagine her saying that defensively in a letter to her agent.
Yes, I think that's probably what happened.
Yeah. So interestingly, you made the point accurately that she's likely writing about this event from 26 in the 60s, because that's when most of the autobiography was composed. we talked about it on the podcast before, but there's the book by G.C. Ramsay, which is remarkable. You've made this point several times about how it stands out as something that was unusually endorsed, right? As in Christie read it and went through the draft and gave notes on. So although it's not autobiography and although it's not directly coming from her, we can at least deduce and be confident that she read Ramsay's account of the disappearance, and presumably if there was anything too egregious in it, then she would have struck
objected.
it.
Yes, definitely.
So the fact that she let all of this through is quite incredible, really, because it's a bit of a long extract, but I'll read it now. So Ramsay writes, Agatha Christie's mother died, and Agatha Christie sensed the impending breakup of her own marriage. These two pressures, together with the strain of constant work, became too much for her inventive mind to absorb all at once, and it revolted in one of the curious ways that minds have to relieve anxiety. Agatha Christie suffered an attack of amnesia and simply walked out of her life one afternoon in 1926, abandoning her car in a field. The amnesia has since been verified beyond any shadow of a doubt as genuine, but at the time there were doubts indeed among the general public. An anonymous tip led police to a hotel in Harrogate, Yorkshire, where a young lady was staying under an assumed name. The young lady, who was reported as being eager to play piano in trios with the orchestra there, turned out to be Agatha Christie, registered under the name of the woman who later became Colonel Christie's second wife. What stung Mrs. Christie most about the whole unfortunate incident was that the press had accused her of disappearing as a publicity stunt to advertise her books, although why, in the name of heaven, she would have registered under the name she did if it were a publicity stunt never seemed to occur to people at the time. So this is the bit where Ramsay sort of comes to her defence, I think.
Very much so, yes.
You can see why she would have let it go through. It is a sad fact of life that the British press has been known upon occasion to be very cruel to famous people. To a certain extent, Mrs. Christie's desire for privacy has only fanned the flames of curiosity since 1926. For many years, she sought to avoid any publicity whatsoever and would not even let her publishers print her portrait with her books. And he goes on to sort of, more closely link that event with her desire, obsession, you might even say, with privacy, which again, we can at least infer that she didn't think he was massively wide of the mark.
Yeah, I think that's
she
fair.
would have struck it all.
Yeah, we might, say that there are specific details there that
Pacific Ocean.
There are specific details there, like leaving the car, whether it was in a field or not.
Yes, but I thought that. But then also, we know that Agatha is actually a quite unreliable
absolutely, and she was in a fugue state. So
but as in the
sense
actual
of
facts.
it, the motivation behind it.
Yes,
from Agatha's perspective.
We're not going to go through every biographical account of the disappearance because we'd be here all day, but I thought it was important to bring out Lucy Worsley's perspective on the disappearance as her Christie's most recent biographer, but also she has a particular take on it, I think. Yeah,
she calls these accusations of wrongdoing the great injustice of Agatha Christie's life. And Lucy Worsley goes on to say, unfortunately for Agatha's lasting reputation, many of her biographers, notably her male biographers, have been as heavily invested in this narrative, so this is the narrative of sort of it being a publicity stunt or deceptive in some way, as the male police officers and journalists who made it into such a sensation at the time. It's time to do something radical, to listen to what Agatha says, to understand she had a range of experiences unhelpfully labelled as loss of memory, and perhaps most importantly, when she says she was suffering, to believe her.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're both in agreement with that. Worsley's biography does take a very particular, both feminist and mental health approach to life writing. Yes. And I think that's something that's kind of her raison d'etre, really, is the stuff about the disappearance.
Where she very much calls attention to things like, the counselling or psychiatry that Agatha had after the disappearance and stuff, which I think has been under examined before. And I know that Lucy found some new things there that have been mentioned. We recorded this documentary together in the car on the way there, or I was sort of, a small part of it, but on the car on the way to filming, she was telling me how excited she was that she just had a new lead from like a friend of a friend, or someone had mentioned in passing that they'd known the psychiatrist for who Agatha perhaps went to. Wow. And so she really explored this properly in a way that I think has just been, oh, and she had a breakdown, let's move on. Or she said she had a breakdown, but can we trust her? Which is a way that's been explored before. Not by everybody, it's worth saying, but that clearly, Lucy was looking to really unpack it in a little way more, like you say, with this mental health approach, and just take it more seriously and to listen to her.
Yeah. Well, it coalesces, I guess, with just a 21st century sensibility about a greater vocabulary and a more holistic understanding of mental health issues. So it very much feels like a perspective of Christie that makes sense to publish in 2020, whatever it was.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense if you actually pay attention to Agatha Christie's life, the idea that it would be a publicity stunt, because, where were her earlier ones? Like, when she did her grand tour, she didn't, make sure she got loads of publicity for absolutely everything. She did the odd interview, but that's exactly the sort of way you might do a publicity stunt, that you might, Mrs. Christie comes to solve a murder in South Africa or something, and she didn't do any of that up to that point, and she certainly didn't do it afterwards. So even from a basic who is Agatha Christie perspective, it makes no sense.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Laura Thompson's biography is very strong on the disappearance as well, but we won't go into, like I said, we really want to be led by Agatha's words in particular, and we won't go into it in depth. One thing I did pull out from it, though, because I've not seen it in other accounts, or certainly not all of them, is that, so Thompson writes, in some reports, Dorr Frederick, the man who saw Agatha's car during the disappearance night, quote, also made reference to a gypsy girl whom he met nearby on Saturday morning, who said that she had heard a car at about midnight being driven along the top of Newlands Corner, and
which is where the car was found.
Yes, yeah, but I immediately went, that is so Endless Night.
Yes.
Endless Night is a standalone psychological thriller in which young couple Michael and Ellie are menaced by unusual happenings. It's from 1967.
So, we're talking about the ways in which this story has echoes through the 60s works. Well, that's a huge one, I think. For those who haven't yet read it, there's a sort of bystander character who is very much a portent of warnings and foreshadowings in a similarly kind of rural landscape in that book. Even 30, 40 years later, when our swinging period begins, the kind of spectre of this news story of Agatha's disappearance was still coming up, right?
Oh, yes, yeah. I mean, it sort of seems to disappear a little bit throughout the sort of 40s and earlier 50s, as in it's not always a first topic of conversation in a way that perhaps things like the success of the Mousetrap started to be, once it got past a year or so, but also the success of her 1930s books. But yeah, there were things towards the end of the 50s that indicated that it was coming round again. And Laura Thompson, again, gives a really nice summary of some of the correspondence about this. So she points out how in February 1957, Rosalind Hicks, Agatha's daughter, wrote to Edmund Cork, Agatha's agent, about an article that had appeared in the Daily Mail. I was most upset to see a reference to her disappearance. It said, of a missing woman, I'm not sure she's not doing an Agatha Christie on us. I don't know whether you can make some complaint about this. It makes me very angry, and I know it will not please my mother. I really do feel very strongly about it. Thompson goes on to say, the events of 1926 were always extremely sensitive for Rosalind, for mixed reasons, of course. She herself had much to forgive about the behaviour of both her parents, and she was also obliged to maintain the semi-fiction of the official theory. At the same time, her instinctive reaction when the subject arose was to rise to her mother's defence. She could not bear Agatha to be defamed or ridiculed. She knew something of the agony that her mother had endured at that time, and it literally pained her to have this belittled. The unspoken subject, as Joan Oates called it, was a test to be passed in order to be admitted over Rosalind's personal threshold. Anyone who regarded Agatha's behaviour as deceitful or attention-seeking would have the door shut upon them. Agatha herself had learned in 1960 that the journalist Richie Calder was preparing to write a book containing his memories of Agatha's discovery at Harrogate. Her reaction, as expressed to Edmund Cork, was sanguine. "You may worry it's coming to my ears," she wrote, "but after all it's only what crops up from time to time every few years, and what does it matter after all this time?" This may, of course, have been bravura.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? There are a few instances where it feels like it's struck a particular nerve with either Rosalind or Agatha, and then others where they are slightly more...
I feel Rosalind's is much more sensitive about it, actually.
Yeah, which I guess makes sense as it's kind of... As Thompson was saying there, it's kind of her legacy, right?
Yeah.
And she's inherently very much involved in it because she is the child of Agatha and Archie Christie, the first husband that all this kind of happens around.
But she's also the child, the 7-year-old child, who's being left by, her mother. Like, she's going off, and we know that this is all, this is a mental health crisis that she's going through, but this was not always a straightforward relationship in the family for all sorts of reasons, and so there may be a bit of resentment from herself there about that. No matter what you might know, that nevertheless her mother did choose to leave her that evening, even though she was in very good care. So I think that might be a part of it as well, that it's something that is painful for both of them.
Well, Worsley picks up the same story that Thompson talks about there with Richie Calder.
Who did eventually write that article, by the way.
Oh, did he?
It did come out in the 70s in a magazine, and there's nothing much to be learned about it. It actually is mostly him talking about the experience and what he saw of other people, basically making up stories to try and keep it on the front page of the newspapers.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, so Christie said to Cork, whilst talking about this Richie Calder attempt, "One of the advantages of being 70 is that you really don't care any longer what anyone says about you. It's a thing that can't be helped, just slightly annoying." And I don't know, I love that quote because it feels very much like that is the Christie that we see in this project, right? That is the Christie that we've been kind of examining up close in the last however many episodes.
And I've never really written about it very much, but I do have a quote from me, as in something that I
Mark, I told you only go for reputable sources.
So this is in my Poirot book, where I say how, following the abduction of Muriel Mackay in December 1969, this was an apparent case of mistaken identity in an attempt to extort money from media mogul Rupert Murdoch, whose wife was the intended target. The press quickly turned to Christie to comment on the mystery, which goes back to that other thing about Rosalind just over 10 years earlier, of like someone doing an Agatha Christie in quotation marks. Yes, so Agatha wrote to Edmund Cork to say, "BBC rang me up, so did a lot of newspapers, to suggest I would like to comment on disappearance of Mrs. Mackay, quote, as disappearing tricks are right up your street, aren't they?" End quote. And Christie then said that he was a very brash and impertinent young man. I refused and was rude to him. Love
Good.
that. I can't tell you how often I reread, because it's in her handwriting, that bit, to say, is that definitely what she says? I don't know. It definitely is what she says. Like, impertinent, and I was rude to him. Like, yeah, well done, Agatha. I'm proud of you.
Okay, so let's go through then the references and allusions in our swinging text that may put a reader in mind of Agatha's disappearance.
And shall we say before we start that this is an absolutely typical case of us of going, I think there's a couple of things there to build an episode around. By the time we get to the end of the list, we're like, oh my God, there's so much stuff.
Oh, well, absolutely. I think it's worth saying I don't think it's particular to 59 to 70 either.
No.
Like, I think you could do a similar study of the books in the 40s and find just as many allusions, because that's the way that creative minds work. That's the way that these things come to the fore. And so in particular, we're sort of looking at, things like instances of running away and disappearing, missing persons, because some people have inferred that it could have been a suicide attempt. So looking at that, the kind of intrusion of the press, which is a big one, and the setting, quarries and cars abandoning quarries and things like that. So let's start with disappearing.
So I guess our most literal is the disappearance of Mr. Davenham.
Hercule Poirot, The Disappearance of Mr. Davenham is a television pilot for a potential Poirot series starring Martin Gable, shown on CBS in 1962.
Which is now available to view on YouTube.
Yes,
Someone's put
it
it on
is.
YouTube. Funny enough, Kaleidoscope, I can say, the Archive TV organisation, because they've shown it now, they just showed it as well, because about 2 or 3 months ago, they sent me a message to say, did you know this existed, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, yes, I did, and I've seen it, and I've got it. And they were like, oh, we want to show it at our screening. I was like, oh, that would be lovely. And not 2 weeks before their screening, hoping to make it a nice exclusive, someone just stuck it up on YouTube. So there were clearly some are printed on the rounds somewhere. But it's lovely to see. So do seek it out. You can find it on YouTube.
It's brilliant.
So it's really well worth
like
watching.
it.
You could imagine a series coming out of it.
Absolutely.
And it's a shame that didn't happen. But clearly, the source material for this is pre-disappearance, and I guess you can see people thinking about, oh, is it all just a big trick at the time, when Agatha did only a few years earlier write a story in which somebody does fake their own disappearance, which is what happens in this.
Well, and not just this story. There were several instances of, that's kind of her whole MO. That is where those theories came from. Not to say that they're right, that we believe them, that they're right, but I rewatched it the other day for this episode, and it's right there at the beginning. One of the very first shots is kind of over Poirot's shoulder at the front page of the newspaper, the Boston News, and the headline is "Vanished Money Man, Police Hunt Slows." Hold that next to the Daily Mirror's mystery of woman novelist disappearance front page about Agatha Christie, and they're very similar.
Absolutely.
You spot the difference with it. So even just in the kind of visual, and this is an adaptation after all, in the visual storytelling, and similarly in The Clocks.
The Clocks is a Poirot novel about espionage and an unidentified body from 1963.
Now, The Clocks is quite interesting because right at the start, the body that's found right at the start with this confusing array of clocks around it, you almost have to reverse engineer this one, right? Which is like, it's not that the disappearance is up top. It's like, if a body is there, that means somewhere else someone has disappeared. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
And when Inspector Hardcastle is trying to put it together, he says, we've made inquiries about a missing person, but it isn't easy to get much information. It turns out that the identity of the person, that he changed his name fairly often. So again, we've got this idea like Agatha signing into the Harrogate Hotel under a different name and potentially even kind of forgetting her name. And he lists off Henry Castleton, Raymond Blair, Lawrence Dalton, Roger Byron are all aliases from this character. And again, I was put in mind of it, and you can see it in our episode art for this special, designed by Tom Double, which is that famous image, the composite image that one of the papers makes of Agatha in different disguises.
Yes, with glasses and then slightly different glasses and a hair back and in a hat.
Yeah.
Or a new wig, isn't it?
I was going to say, I thought it was like
it's
a Velma
bob,
wig.
isn't it? Yes, actually, yes.
Roger Byron, would disappear from Southend, and a man called Lawrence Dalton would commence operations in Newcastle on Tyne. He was shy of being photographed. Sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely something to dig in there. And also, it's a more tenuous point, but a point I thought may be worth raising nevertheless, which is the story of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay. And Mr. Ramsay's political defection is, in a way, it's like the sort of Cold War version of a disappearance. Do you know what I mean? And there's a lot of page time dedicated to that later in the book.
There is in By the Pricking of My Thumbs.
By the Pricking of My Thumbs sees Tommy and Tuppence return to investigate a mystery at a nursing home from 1968.
There's Mrs. Lancaster. Her disappearance drives the plot.
It does, yeah.
This is our intrigue at the beginning. And it's funny, I was thinking about what keeps you interested in a story, in a mystery. And now, because we've just had a book club here about The Moving Finger, and I was saying about how, because it's not necessarily the case that the person who writes these poison pen letters is the murderer, I find that really interesting as a reader. And there's a bit about that here, about that the disappearance is not necessarily leading to the identity of a murderer, but you can be pretty sure there's going to be a murder involved somewhere. And I love that. I love that intrigue of like, is this even a real disappearance, or is it, as we have in this quote, you mean her people had taken her away? That's not a disappearance. It's quite natural. It's a disappearance. No traceable address, no answer to letters. It's a planned disappearance. I'm more and more sure of it. So this is Tommy and Tuppence with their sort of detecting hats on, going, well, come on. Whereas, in the real world, can you imagine going to go a care home or something, and people are like, oh, yes, lots of the people seem to disappear, and you'd be like, yes, this does happen at care
It's Tommy and
homes.
Tuppence going, but we're in a Tommy and Tuppence novel,
Absolutely.
so it must be some sort of crime to solve. And that it does one of those things that I love in late career Christie. It does several times where it's almost like they're grappling around for the case that they're going to investigate at all,
yes.
just to get
there must
get a
be
handle
something
on it.
here
There must be
to get us through this novel.
But there was, they were right. But yeah, we should say, so Mrs. Lancaster, she's sort of spirited away from the care home at which they're visiting Tommy's Aunt Ada, and Mrs. Lancaster has had this slightly strange encounter with Tuppence on one visit, and then they go back and she's gone. So similarly, so Olga Semenoff, who is the au pair from Herzegovina in Halloween Party, she disappears.
Halloween Party is a Poirot mystery novel in which a girl is drowned while apple bobbing from 1969.
So she works for Mrs. Llewellyn Smythe at the Quarry House, and we will return to that in a minute. And she's suspected of forging the will of her former employer who died and disappears off the back of it.
She isn't a main character, it's fair to say. Her disappearance is one of many mysterious things happen in the marvellous Halloween Party.
Yes.
But I think the big one in the 1960s, the most significant character that disappears, is Canon Pennyfather at Bertram's Hotel.
At Bertram's Hotel is a Miss Marple novel set in a London hotel which is not quite what it seems, from 1965.
Very memorable, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. We're given quite a lot of details about it, even the date he disappears, November the 19th. Nice. We should have a little party every year.
What date is it today? It's
November
the 12th.
Ooh, close.
Well, this time next week.
Close.
November 20th, we're doing Christie for Christmas to
there you go.
HarperCollins.
So it will be
we will celebrate on behalf of Canon Pennyfather.
There you go. But, I do think, so it's with a slightly different spelling, it is, of course, the name that she gave the Poirot substitute many years before in a play version.
In Murder on the Nile, yes.
Of Murder on the Nile, a play version of Death on the Nile called Murder on the Nile. And there's something, so that I think there's already, for me anyway, there's already as a long time kind of Christie devotee, when he crops up, that's almost like a big neon sign towards him going, this is a significant character.
Yes.
And I think, in terms of holding a particular focus in the novel, that kind of works on a textual basis as well. But yeah, his disappearance is reported in the press, but nobody's come forward with any information yet. He disappeared from a respectable West End hotel, rather than reappearing in a Yorkshire hotel.
Yes.
And I think most crucially, the inspector says it really looked as though he meant to disappear, leaving this place like that in the middle of the night. you're quite sure about it, aren't you? And he's also described as an absent-minded gentleman. And again, if you want to, strain the confines of the reading, you could get to kind of forgetfulness there as well.
Definitely, yeah. And the inspector also says that a lot of these disappearances are voluntary. He says, of course, a lot of these disappearances are voluntary, which is true. And you noticed how Laura Thompson pulled out that quote.
Well, yeah, because this is a point where Christie is still being, as we've just seen, still being battered by these accusations of she did it deliberately.
Yeah.
And so to have a detective figure in one of her novels kind of doubting the credulity of somebody's, doubting that a disappearance is genuine is really quite significant. That's why Thompson pulls it out. And Bertram's Hotel is full of car imagery. And we've talked about this before. Christie discovered a real love of driving, didn't she? And cars sort of peppered throughout her oeuvre in a really quite a modern way, because a lot of women of her ilk and class wouldn't have driven as extensively as she did. Certainly wouldn't have loved, had such a passion for it as she did. And abandoning the car is such a crucial part of that disappearance story, isn't it?
Yes.
But yeah, there's all sorts of really striking car images evoked in a Bertram's Hotel because
you've got a
racing
professional racing driver, as one of our lead characters.
As one of the protagonists, yeah. The sudden roar of a car's exhaust, the screaming of wheels, and the sound of a big racing engine. That is beautiful. Piece of writing.
That's a woman who loves her driving, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece of writing from a crucial moment towards the end of the book, but I won't say any more in case there's anyone left that hasn't yet read it.
So we should also cover the fact that there are references to suicide within some of these books. So just to flag that up to any listeners who might want to skip over this next section.
Yes, and we should say, actually, we always put sort of content trigger warnings in the episode description, so it's always worth having a look there. And as we're talking about, we may as well say, indeed, we write the titles that we've spoiled in the episode description as well, so it's always worth checking that before you click play. But yeah, there's a real preoccupation with suicide attempts in Caribbean mystery.
A Caribbean Mystery is a Miss Marple novel about a murder on the fictional island of Saint Honoré from 1964.
Which I think is significant, and we talked about this in our horror episode, but I think it's significant because it's after the suicide of Campbell Christie, Archie's brother. It's after the much publicised suicide of Sylvia Plath. We've just had the big freeze, and there was a bit of a kind of spate of suicides during that particularly bleak period in British history. So maybe it makes sense that the book that she was kind of gearing up to write through that period is particularly saturated in these things. I wanted to spotlight V is for Venom, which is the newer Catherine Harkup book. So she wrote A is for Arsenic, and which we use extensively in our drugs episode.
Yeah.
And she followed up with V is for Venom. She writes in 1963, the year Agatha Christie must have been planning a Caribbean mystery, 40% of suicides in England and Wales were due to carbon monoxide poisoning, and she goes on. And it's very much a particular moment in time, because what you see then, as she goes on to say, is that there's a 35% drop in all suicides between 63 and 75 because of the removal of carbon monoxide from domestic gas supplies. Not the sole reason, she clarifies, but certainly an important factor. But that just shows just how domestic and just how commonplace suicide attempts were in this period.
And I also wonder if there's something about the reporting of suicides that the sort of, use, in quotation marks, the shame of a suicide in a family meant that it was often covered up by families because they didn't want that to be the reported reason, whether for religious reasons or elsewhere or something else. But I think there was more transparency actually about causes of death.
That's very true.
As the 20th century moved on.
Because I guess it goes hand in hand with the stuff that we've talked about before, vis-a-vis the 60s just generally being a bit more liberal, people being a bit more accepting and open and honest, and absolutely.
Yeah. Well, in A Caribbean Mystery, Miss Marple does say to Raphael, Mr. Raphael, that as far as she's concerned, it's young people who commit suicide easily, out of despair from love, sometimes from sheer anxiety and worry. But old people know how valuable life is and how interesting, which is a wonderful thing to you know, that shows the clarity of age, you know, that Miss Marple's really expressing there, that the older you get, the more you can value life in a particular way. And I think that quote speaks just as much to us in the 21st century as it did in the 1960s. I think that's a really nice approach to the subject.
Crucial to the plot of Caribbean Mystery is that the murderer Tim is trying to make his wife Molly look mad and indeed look like she might kill herself. And there are various conversations about the veracity of that, whether it's convincing or not. Molly always seems such a happy girl, that kind of thing, which I think is interesting as well, given that, I don't know, we talk about that again maybe a lot more openly today, that, you know, that people are fighting their own battles and that you might not necessarily realise. But similar to what you were just saying about that quote to Raphael, it's very astute from Christie, that depiction.
Yes. People, even when they think they want to commit suicide, often don't really want to do it. They manage not to take a full overdose. It's not always deliberate deceit. It's just the subconscious looking after itself.
I mean,
and then
the links, the potential links you could draw there are fascinating, I think.
Absolutely. I also noticed when I was going through the subject that I didn't even reread it, but it occurred to me that in The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding, the short story collection.
The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding and a Selection of Entrees is a collection of early short stories, including the titular The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding, or The Theft of the Royal Ruby, and The Mystery of the Spanish Chest, both of which were rewritten for publication in 1960.
There is The Dream, which we don't talk about on this podcast, simply because it's an old story that wasn't revised for this collection. But we do know that Agatha was involved in the collection, obviously from the rewriting of two of the stories, but also because she was part of the selection process. You know, they discussed the stories.
Yeah.
So we know she would have read this during the 1960s and reread it.
Well, crucially, we know that readers read it in the 60s. You know, whether or not Christie actually reviewed those stories, we know she didn't make changes to them apart from the first two, but readers were picking that up in 1960.
Yeah, where the whole premise of it is that Mr. Farley says that he has dreams of suicide, and that then eventually does end up apparently committing suicide. And so this is, you know, this like premonition, the idea that he might have been driven to it, but by his unconscious, that he wasn't actually in control of it, because this is why Poirot gets called in, because he keeps on having these dreams. But most particularly, I noted that Dr. Stillingfleet is a character in this. So I think only appears in one other novel before this. And Dr. Stillingfleet says, it isn't the people who threaten to commit suicide who usually do it, you know. That's why suicides sometimes seem unaccountable. But this is significant because Stillingfleet reappears in Third Girl to talk to somebody who's got fear of, you know, perhaps suicide, perhaps deaths, perhaps all sorts of things that might be happening to them psychologically. So I suspect that Agatha was influenced or reminded of this sort of psychological approach when she reread The Dream. And
reminded of that character. And
yeah, exactly.
Because he hadn't appeared since Sad Cypress.
Is that right? Okay, yes.
So, and there's a lot of conversation around that with Norma, because Norma just seems to be this young girl in sort of free-falling crisis.
Yeah.
And that might be a good moment to segue into the idea of a fugue state and memory loss, actually, because that could have been an explanation for Norma's demeanour in Third Girl. We know it isn't. It's actually that she's hopped up on Purple Hearts. But yeah, Molly, as we've just spoken about in A Caribbean Mystery, she's drugged via her face cream by Tim, and she has blackouts and these sort of, I think it's belladonna that he puts in it. It's like psychedelic, isn't it?
Yes.
So she has dreams of flying through the air. Miss Marple says, no wonder she got frightened about herself. She had all the signs of mental illness. I think Christie often walks, for someone that's so plot-driven and black and white, arguably, she actually surprisingly often walks the line between the fantastical and the dreamlike and reality. We talked a bit about it. Do you remember there's that bit that I love in Pricking of My Thumbs where Tuppence has a nightmare and you just go with LSD all around us. What would a reader in 1968 have made of that kind of nightmarish sequence and that jolt waking up?
Well, it's funny that this thing about the dreams of flying, there's The Call of Wings, which is one of her very earliest short stories. But if you were to have had it published in the 1960s, I think you would have seen it as a discussion of psychedelia, whereas actually it's much more rooted in sort of more traditional fantasy, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Because in Third Girl...
Third Girl is a Poirot novel set in swinging London about a young woman who thinks she may have committed a murder from 1966.
There's a particular quote in Third Girl I pulled out. You think she may have lost her memory, meaning Norma. One hears of such things. I mean, again, just inviting these links back to the story of the disappearance. Poirot says, yes, that is a possibility. In her state, she may be wandering about quite unaware of who she is. Or she may have had an accident. That is less likely. I can assure you that I have made all inquiries in hospitals and they find her and they end up finding her with Stillingfleet.
The use of drugs really muddies the water between what is a mental health crisis or issue and what is being instigated by the drugs. Yeah. Because when Dr. Stillingfleet says that the symptoms that Norma's experiencing include confusion, loss of memory, aggression, bewilderment, or sheer fuzzle-headedness, well, those could be due to drugs just as much or perhaps more easily than anything else. But because initially that isn't really raised as the most likely scenario, it sort of forces us to work out whether we want to make that connection or not. That some people might go, this seems like it, especially because there's been quite a few references to drugs in the story.
Yeah.
Or whether you're thinking,
yeah, I mean, also, though, they're not two separate things, are they? Like, as in a mental health crisis and drug use do and can go hand in hand. Not exclusively, but they can do. So we're just sort of walking that line.
And I guess it's significant to mention that along with this sort of mental health issues or whatever's going on with Norma, there were, quoting, claims to have had lapses of memory, to have lost long periods of time when she does not remember what she had been doing. Which perhaps is a neat sort of summary of Agatha going, this is a thing that really does happen.
Yeah. It's funny, now we're talking about it, I'm going, is there, because we've often said, haven't we, that there's a perhaps surprising lack of judgment from Christie when she talks about things like young people taking drugs.
Oh, completely,
like
yeah.
And I wonder if this is another argument for her sympathy with characters like Norma, which is going, the girl's suffering, and actually the way she talks about her is quite sympathetic.
Yes.
So press intrusion is a regular feature of Christie's narratives. I guess it holds that, generally speaking, a case including murders and disappearances, the press are going to be interested in that. But the way they're characterised perhaps quite negatively after her experiences, quite, as I said, intrusion, quite intrusively, and sort of all kind of crowding in is very particular. There's a lot about the press in Mirror Cracked because, of course, we're talking about stars.
The Mirror Cracks from Side to Side is a Miss Marple novel about a poisoning at a film star's house. It's from 1962.
It's the world of Hollywood that's encroaching on our humble Miss Marple novel there. Yeah, and so there's various moments where people talk about what the papers are saying about the murder that's taken place and the connection to Marina Gregg. You get the impression that Marina Gregg has probably had as much, if not more, negative press coverage over her years of her career than Christie had.
Although they didn't manage to spot that she had a baby, so they haven't been that intrusive.
No, true.
The Clocks has got this as well, the press pop up in the Clocks, because after the telephone box murder, Mrs. Lawton, who's one of the witnesses nearby, says that indeed we have heard from the press, knocking at the door and ringing at the bell and asking all sorts of foolish questions. Definitely an insight into Agatha's thinking there. Yeah. Very annoying, I know, said the inspector. I wish we could spare you all that, Mrs. Lawton. We'd put a stop to a good deal of that if we could, but we're powerless in the matter, you know. The press has its rights. It's a shame to worry private people as they do, said Mrs. Lawton, saying they have to have news for the public. So when you're disappearing, you're a crime writer, the idea that perhaps the public have got a right to know about it, rather than it just being a personal matter.
Yeah. Well, again, today there's so much unethical reporting that's defended by, the public have a right to know about this stuff. And it's a very interesting conversation, because at what point is it just intrusive? There's the word
and
again.
nosiness. Let's
Yeah, as opposed to in our interest to...
I mean, Mrs. Lawton doesn't believe in it. She says that it's all a tissue of lies as far as she's concerned. So I think that this is definitely a bit of authorial statement there.
Yeah. And again, I said I rewatched that Disappearance of Mr. Davenham for this, and I noticed that there's not only is there a bit of a scrum of the press, I wish there was the catch-all term for it, but that stereotype that you see in every TV show and every film, and it's Chicago it always makes me think of that thing of the flashing bulbs and the reporters all sort of gathering around and all that stuff. And
what are they like, Gray? That's it. I got it now.
But they do it to Martin Gable's Poirot right at the start of that case, where he's getting out of the taxi, and there's a great meta moment in that where he goes from watching the news of reportage of the case in the TV in the car to the TV in the car showing a shot of him nodding at you, the viewer, going, I'm going to go and get involved in this case. And within the fiction of the piece, you're given to understand that he is looking at a press camera and going, hello, I'm going in. But really, he's looking at us and going, what a jape we're about to go on this case.
I'm going to make a good game of this woman's distress about her disappeared husband.
Exactly. Well,
let's make it into a bet.
Just as well he turns up alive and well then, isn't it? But spoilers. And similarly, the opening of Act 2 of Deathbeat, we read in our archive episode, we read the script for that. It was the mid-60s planned but never staged musical adaptation of Hickory Dickory Dock. And again, there's a moment of crisis at the end of Act 1, murder, and then at the beginning of Act 2, there's this kind of rugby scrum of journalists,
of singing, dancing reporters. How I would love to have seen that musical number stage. Yeah. A few twirling Macs reporters and their big Macs, because that's what it would have been. They would all have been wearing their big Macs. They've had those light bulb flashes and stuff, and a big pad with a pencil.
Yes.
And how those props would have been used, I don't know. We'll just have to imagine.
Oh. What could have been? It's well reported that Agatha's car is found abandoned near a quarry in the story of the disappearance. And quarries as a setting, and quarry gardens as a setting, is something that actually runs throughout the canon. I'm thinking of The Body in the Library. But the 60s, the swinging texts are no exception, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Endless Night. So this curse or this rumour linked to a quarry is established quite early on in Endless Night, that we're told that people got killed here in the quarry when they got the stone out to build. Apparently old Geordie fell over the edge one night and broke his neck. He might have been drunk, we are told. He did like a drop, apparently. But there's many drunks that fall and they don't necessarily have lasting harm. So I love this idea that you can go, oh, isn't that spooky? And they go, I mean, he might have been drunk, but that doesn't necessarily mean. And that's how myths and stuff get established, isn't it?
No, because Michael says, was he drunk? Michael is kind of playing along with the rumour, because he's thinking this will be useful one day.
Yes.
Because then it's almost like a prophecy coming true. What happens then, we're told towards the end, is the body of old Mrs. Lee had been found in the disused quarry on the far side of the hill. She had been dead some days. There had been accidents there before, and it had been said that the place ought to be fenced in, but nothing had been done. A verdict of accidental death had been brought in, and a further recommendation to the council to fence the place off. So Michael is capitalising, as he does throughout, with Mrs. Lee, the character of Mrs. Lee, who we talked about at the start of this episode, actually. She's the sort of bystander, traveller figure. He's going, oh, well, here you go. Here's another it must just be all part of that local story that you tell, as opposed to yet another person that he finishes off. But I think most particularly, most beautifully, is the quarry garden in Halloween Party, which we talked about a little bit in the Halloween special just past, actually, because as we said in that, what happens in the 2023 adaptation of that story is that they relocate the garden on the roof, right? It becomes this terrace garden. But in the book, it's this beautiful, bountiful Garden of Eden in this converted, abandoned quarry. And it's a meeting place for the co-conspirators and lovers. And you pulled out this quote, actually, about the atmosphere in the quarry garden.
Yes, that there was an atmosphere and that Poirot tried to pin it down. It had qualities of magic, of enchantment, certainly of beauty, bashful beauty, yet wild. Here, if you were staging a scene in the theatre, you would have your nymphs, your fauns. You would have Greek beauty, you would have fear too. Yes, he thought, in this sunk garden there is fear.
It's such a beautiful... There's so many different metaphors evoked by that setting, and it's something that Christie does a lot. I'm thinking of the mise-en-scène in The Hollow. I'm thinking of various follies such as Dead Man's. She often has this setting where it can be both a place of the absolute height of asceticism,
yes,
but it also can be debased by murder,
yes,
and that's exactly the kind of dichotomy she's playing with there. And I pulled out that so Poirot's narrative, when he's kind of heading there, he says, a quarry garden was an ugly term. It suggested the noise of blasting rock, the carrying away by lorries of vast masses of stone for road making. It had behind it industrial demand. But a sunk garden, that was different. It brought to mind with it vague remembrances in his own mind. And there's this tension between, you think the desolate, what do you picture when you say quarry? You think of that desolate, you think of risk, you think of Christie's car abandoned on the edge of it, you think of peril and
I think of Doctor Who filming Alien
you
Worlds.
think of and but it's turned into something beautiful and bountiful and almost spiritual, because Michael, would it be terribly anachronistic to call him a landscape gardener?
It probably would, but go for it.
He's it's close. Who's both this portent of beauty and a beautiful man in and of himself, but turns out to be, rotten to the core. He knows how to make this bare quarry of stone and rock blossom as a desert can blossom. Really beautiful writing from Christie to finish off that run through. So next episode is our annual Christmas special.
It is. It's become an annual Christmas special.
I knew that's what you were laughing at before you even said. I could see in your eyes you were thinking, is it an annual special if you've only done one before? I know you so well at this point.
Terrifying. But you know why that is, though? Because you were thinking it too, really.
Yes.
As you were saying it, you were thinking, is it annual? So do get in touch with us. You can find us on Instagram at Christie_time. Our Blue Sky is christietime.bsky.social. You can email us at christietimepod@gmail.com, and our website is christietime.com. You can find Gray on his website at grayrobertbrown.wixsite.com/grayrobertbrown. I'm on Instagram at Dr. Mark Aldridge and Blue Sky as markaldridge.info, which is also my website. And of course, you're always very welcome to pick up one of my books as a lovely Christmas present as it's approaching. Why
Yes,
not?
Quite. And indeed, do please rate and review the podcast wherever you get the podcast. Yes. We've had a few lovely extra reviews recently across the platforms, and we do read them all and we really appreciate it, and comments on Spotify as well. Very nice.
And also don't forget that our previous episode recorded at the festival is available on YouTube. So I hope you'll all be gathering around on Christmas Day, the centre of the activities. Yes. No, Timmy, you can't open a present, not until we've watched the swinging Christies in Torquay.
Excellent. Okay, thanks very much. Keep swinging.
Keep swinging.
Bye. Thanks for listening, my senoritas. The Swinging Christies is a Christie Time project by Dr. Mark Aldridge and Gray Robert Brown. This episode was recorded in Puerto de la Cruz on the 12th of November 2025. Our artwork was designed by Tom Double and Bartlett Studio, and our music is by Dar Golan. Do you want some dins?
Oh my god, I'm hungry.
Are you? I'm quite excited to see what they have.
Yeah.
I suspect I'll walk away with chips and salad, but